It's a ham radio.
The Cadillac of ham radios.
Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Ham Radio and Stranger Things podcast. We've got a great episode for you today as usual, but first, we have a little housekeeping to take care of, and I'm going to turn it over to Jasmin to let you know where you can find us on social media and where you can listen to the podcast.
Thanks, Ashley. You can find us on Instagram at Ham Radio Media, all one word, on Twitter at HamThrough, on YouTube at Ham Radio Media, or using our handle Ham Radio 1983. We also have a Discord you can join, which is linked in the description of this episode. If you have a fan theory or question you want to share, you can email us at hamradiomedia@gmail.com. Ashley also has a fanfic on AO3 entitled Stranger Things College, which is also linked in the description. The podcast is available on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and much more. If you like the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review. We have a lot of totally tubular stuff coming up, so be sure to follow us on social media to keep up with the podcast and all of our new content.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ham Radio and Stranger Things podcast. Today we will be continuing our script breakdown series as we talk about the epic conclusion to the showdown between 1 and 11 at the lab. So now that we've gotten through all of the monologue, remember a couple episodes, we talked about the types of unreliable narrator, and we left you with the question, is Henry an unreliable narrator? So now that we've gotten through the monologue and you've heard our thoughts on the monologue and what is been as it's written in the script, is Henry an unreliable narrator? Well, there is some evidence to suggest that he could be an unreliable narrator. So the first evidence being in season 4, chapter 7, when Henry tells 11 that Brenner was planning to kill her, which by all accounts we know is not true, because don't you think if Brenner had wanted to do that, he would have just done that? And also Henry's story of Soteria just being a tracking device, again, not true. We know that because as we saw the rest of that play out in episode 7, after she removes Soteria from his neck, he immediately goes on a killing spree with using his powers, so we know it wasn't just a tracking device. I mean, there could have been some part of it that did track him, but it was there to inhibit his supernatural abilities. And then again in chapter 7, Henry contradicts himself while telling 11 about how he killed his family and what his intentions were. And then in season 4, chapter 7, Vecna, who's speaking through Lucas, tells Max that she was the chosen one and that it was going to be her, the fourth and final sacrifice that breaks the world. However, as we see in chapters 3, 4, and 5, we know that Max was originally chosen as the third kill, and that had Max not broken free from Vecna's spell in episode 4, Patrick technically would have been the fourth kill.
Yeah, I think Henry is a classic case of an unreliable narrator where he has this big, grandiose idea of himself and what he says goes, but even when he's speaking to people, he contradicts himself all the time. I think the biggest case of this, where I first noticed this while watching the first time around, is chapter 7, is during the memories, where he's saying one thing to 11, but we're seeing something completely different in the memories he's showing Nancy, which by his own account is both true. Like he's saying this to 11 in the past. You begin to notice that, there's other things where he's clearly either not telling the whole truth or contradicting himself, or it kind of gives the vibe of making up as he goes along. He wants 11 to think one thing, he wants Nancy to think something else, so he's framing this a certain way to get that effect. Or, again, when he's trying to hurt Max, he builds this whole thing of you're the chosen one. But as you said, we know in the original plan that was not the case. And there's evidence to suggest that Patrick may have not even been the original victim there, that because there's some differences with Patrick's death. So it seems more like okay, my original plan with Max didn't work, so I got to improvise here. And because we see him looking at people in his mindscape to target. So it's possible he had something else in mind after Max, and that, or, he swapped them because it didn't work or what have you. So he's clearly making it up as he goes along and telling a different story depending on what he needs in that moment. And I think one of the great things about this plot is that they reveal that slowly over time. Like, there's something up with this guy, but as the show goes on, more pieces are revealed.
Yeah, and the thing you brought up about Patrick, again, I think it's too bad that we didn't really get as much screen time with Patrick or really get to know him better. I mean, we didn't even see him in Vecna's mindscape. His skill was definitely very quick, and I feel like because Vecna had lost Max, she managed to escape from his grasp. That by that point, Vecna was just so desperate because he's like, I need to have 4 kills. That's part of my plan. It cannot work unless I have that. I need someone. And we know that his big thing is teenagers, because the trauma that they have gives him greater power. And so he was obviously looking for a teenager or a young person and landed unfortunately on Patrick. But yeah, I think he was just so desperate by that point. He was like, oh, I just got to get somebody.
Yeah. And something that just occurred to me while you were saying that is there's a similarity there between Max and Patrick and Will and Barb. And that Will was the initial target, right? He spent all this time getting to Will, or is the Demogorgon going after Will? We know there's some connection there. Will was targeted. I think that's pretty clear. And likewise, he seems to spend a lot of time on Max, like as well as on Chrissy, but he spent a lot of time on Max. We can see that. And then he can't get to Will because Will's managed to escape and hide for, about a week there. So, Barb winds up dying. And there's speculation to be had was she targeted because she was bleeding? That's why the Demogorgon went after her. Was it a specific target? I mean, the thing I come back to is, as far as we know, Demogorgons don't teleport. Only people with the gift can do that. So even if she was targeted because her hand was bleeding, as far as we know, Vecna is the only character we've actually seen teleport people here. But again, it was the first season, so they hadn't quite figured out the rules. Who knows? But my point is, there's a similarity there, right? Regardless of whether Barb was the specific target or not, there's a connection here of, okay, he spent a lot of time getting to Will, and then he couldn't get to Will. So then Barb gets taken. And there's a similar pattern here where he spent a bunch of time on Max, but then he couldn't get to Max. So he went after Patrick. Whereas I feel there's a pattern here where he spent a lot of time on a target, whether himself or through, his minions, so to speak. And then when he can't get to them, he'll pick another target. So it's kind of wrong place, wrong time, or just happened to be going through something in that moment. Whether that was intended to be a callback or not, I don't know. But I think it's interesting as we understand more about this character and his MO and what he's doing. You come to see the connections between the victims.
Yeah, and I was watching a YouTube video a couple days ago from a YouTuber called the DLA Alternative. I actually talked about in last week's episode on the season 4 epilogue. And in this theory video, he was talking about the vision that Vecna gives Nancy in chapter 8 when he shows her the rifts opening up, and then her mom and Mike and Holly and all that. The YouTuber, he posited a theory that what if Vecna really can't actually predict the future or make something that happen in the future? What if everything that he's showing Nancy there is things that he wants to happen, and that he is powerful enough to conjure them up to make them happen, but those are just he's showing her visions of things that he wants to happen because of the line when he has Nancy in a trance and they're going through the Hawkins lab and he's telling her, Nancy, where are you going? I've shown you where I've been and I'd like to show you where I'm going. And so what if he really can't actually predict the future? Or what if he can't actually make things happen necessarily in the future? I mean, obviously we know that the rifts did open up So he was able to do that. And so some of these things I feel like he has been working on since he's been in the Upside Down, but I don't think that he can literally do everything because, again, Max was supposed to be his third kill, and then she got away, and so then Patrick became his third kill, and she just wound up by circumstance being the fourth kill because she was still marked by him. So he's not as godlike as he wants to make himself out to be. And time again, throughout the seasons, we've that work against him. Like, he has not been proven to be capable of doing the things that he thinks he can. Like, for example, who would have thought when you try to work with beings from an alternate dimension who have no brains and cannot function as humans do on Earth, who would have thought that would have been so difficult to be able to get things done?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of variables it feels like he hasn't considered. And I mean, it's just kind of two ways of thinking. Either he can make things happen, kind of predict the future, but as in life, humans are unpredictable. And so by acting, people are changing what's happening. Or you're right, and he literally can't do that. And he's, just showing what he's planning to do, what he wants to have happen. Or there could also be a limitation to this power. Like if he could be being truthful about being able to do this, but not to the grandiose extent he's saying. It's not like he can go days, weeks, years into the future. Maybe he can only go by a few minutes. Maybe it's a few hours. Maybe there's a limit, which wouldn't surprise me because we've seen other examples of both him and 11 where there is a limit to your powers, and that when he's younger, and we're seeing that, he thinks he can do it all. He kills his mother in this really grotesque way, and then he decides to put his father into trance to torture him while killing his sister, and he thinks he can do that and then go back and kill his father, which we find out he can't do. And following that, we don't see any of the kids with powers try to do, or him try to do something, like two things at once, because that clearly drains you too much. So it's also possible, as a child, he had this grandiose sense of, I can do it all, and then he can't. Maybe he can do a few hours, a few days at most, but I don't think if he does have that ability, it goes beyond that, because he would have been able to affect things to a much larger degree. And I also think a lot of the actions we see him take in seasons 1 through 3 as the puppet master would not have been necessary if he had that far-reaching ability. And I also wonder if he's doing this to try to manipulate the characters into doing a certain thing, like by scaring Nancy and showing her Barb's death, and then, making her feel guilty, and then showing her the people she loves being killed. He knows that's going to push her in a certain direction. Now, I don't know what he was where he was intending that to push her. He clearly did not intend for her to attack him. So I'm not, if that was the plan, if he was trying to push her maybe into backing off or something, like I don't know what his plan was, if he did have a plan there, but that clearly didn't work out the way he thought it would. And so it's possibly he wasn't trying to manipulate, or he's just in his own arrogance. He thought he could scare her so badly that she'd back off and didn't realize that would push her to attack him. Because something I've noticed as we've been going through this is he acts like he knows everything, but he only appears to have access to people's bad memories, like the really horrible stuff, their trauma, the negative things in their life. He does not appear so far to have access to their other memories. When we see him going after Patrick, when we see him looking at targets, these are all bad things, but we don't see him access good memories. We don't see him access positive things. So it's also possible he just could not access that part of Nancy or her memories that would have shown him that that was the reaction he was going to get. And so he underestimated or he miscalculated because he can only see part of the equation. And either he's so arrogant he doesn't realize that, or he just doesn't care. And he's like, well, I've got enough information here. So it is a curious question of how much can this guy actually do, and how much of it is him, his arrogance and him saying grandiose things, and are there limits to that, or is he just trying to manipulate the people that he's targeting? Alrighty, so that brings us back to our script breakdown. So we pick back up with 1 and 11 at the lab. They are in the Rainbow Room. We as the audience have just emerged from seeing 11's memories of her mother and hearing Terry say, "I love you." And the first big change that Ashley and I noticed is that in the script, Eleven throws one into the mirror and then drops to her hands and knees. But in the final version, she sends him through the mirror. It breaks. He goes to the other side of the observation room. And then she drops out into a superhero pose on one knee with her hands outstretched. So in the original version, one is pinned to the mirror. It is not, like, it is still intact. But in the final version, he is sent through it. It breaks. He is pinned to the wall behind it. And in the original version, the script, it's indicated that Eleven drops to her knees out of exhaustion. Whereas in the final version, she's more in control. She has found her inner strength. This is a superhero pose. And she's also done a lot more. She has literally thrown this guy through a two-way glass mirror into an observation room, into the tile wall behind it with incredible force. Whereas in the original version, he is pinned to the mirror that is cracking under pressure, but it is not broken.
Yeah, and I actually didn't even notice this change until like a couple of weeks ago, what, as is written in the script about the mirror. Yeah, I would love to have seen how that would have played out on screen, but I feel like it just worked out better from a filming standpoint, the way they did it in the final cut with her sending him through it, because number one, it makes her look like she has the upper hand there, which she does, and that she's more powerful in that moment than him, which she does appear to be so. But also, I feel like the showrunners are going for something much deeper there in terms of imagery and symbolism. And so it had me thinking, I wonder what the symbolism for a two-way mirror is. And so I did a little research on it. And so I learned that two-way mirrors, often depicted in movies and TV shows, symbolize surveillance, privacy violation, and the potential for hidden observation. They represent a situation where someone can see without being seen, raising questions about power dynamics and the erosion of personal space. A two-way mirror is also an apt analogy for the spiritual transition of age. Most of our lives, we only see one side of reality while the other side remains dark, for example, unconscious from the ego's perspective. In other words, what we actually see is a mentally constructed projection of the world consisting of countless layers of thought, belief, labels, fantasy, and identity. This has also been called the projection of the word of man, a left brain construction. It attracts all the divine light for decades. The mirror also symbolizes the narcissism of constantly focusing on self-reflections. And I think if you just think about season 4 as a whole, there's a lot of things to do with, growing up, and just really throughout Stranger Things. Like, Stranger Things to me has always been a coming of age show about adolescence and growing up. And I think especially in Will's character, we see that a lot, because I know that he was kidnapped and he spent a week in an alternate dimension and the trauma from that. I'm not taking anything away from that. But I feel like Will as a character, even if that hadn't have happened, I think that he still would have struggled with growing up. And it really has nothing to do with him being gay or anything like that. I think even if he were straight, he would still struggle with that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I certainly did growing up throughout my childhood and adolescence. It's very hard whenever you have friends that you're really close with, and, you come back from the summer the next school year and they're completely different, and then they have boyfriends or girlfriends and you do not, and they want to hang out with their significant others and spend less time hanging out with you and all those things. And so I think that Henry also, I think in a way, struggles or has struggled with growing up. And look, these two characters, I think, there's so many parallels between Will and Henry, and I think that's why Henry chose Will in season 1, because he felt a connection with Will and somewhat of a kinship, and thought, hey, this kid will understand me. He truly will, because him and I, we're on the same wavelength here because of their childhoods, being different and being the special kid. And they both went through circumstances that were out of their control. I mean, Henry being sent to the lab and spending 20 years of his life in the lab, in prison, and then Will being taken to an alternate dimension and being trapped there for a week and just truly not being able to really grow up. But yeah, I feel like that's what Stranger Things really is all about. And I think the symbolism here with the two-way mirror, I think from an imagery standpoint, really projects that very well to the audience. And also because this show is also about parallels, I mean, parallel dimensions. And it's just so beautiful when she like sends Henry through the mirror like that, like almost in a way, like bringing him, I guess, back to reality in a weird way.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really wonderful about this season is that there's a lot of symbolism with the way things are shot, the colors, the parallels. You can tell they put a lot of time and energy into thinking about that and how to illustrate what was going on visually. So I think this season is a really good example of like show, don't tell, where even though there is a lot of dialogue and exposition because we do need backstory about Henry and Vecna and One, and we do need to know a lot about what's, where we pick up with these characters. So there is a lot of exposition there. But there's also a lot of great moments of show, don't tell, where we're getting these parallels. They're using the visual environment to tell a story on a deeper level. And you can see where changes have been made, where they had something they originally wrote down, but when they got to filming it, they're like, you know what, we're trying to get this point home to the audience. How about we do it this way? So it'll, parallel what we're saying in the dialogue, or it'll kind of get this point across a bit more clearly. And visually, it's really stunning. Like, I think that's one of the highlights of season 4 is, for all its flaws, it is visually a stunning season. Probably the best season they've done in terms of visuals, in terms of the colors they use, the way things are shot is really cool. It's just a visually very stunning season with a lot of different locations in there. And so you can tell they put like a lot of time and thought into, okay, well, this is the story we're telling, and this is how we're going to express that both, just the dialogue, but also visually, which I think is one of like the best parts of this season, truly. All right, from there, we cut to the Nina tank in the present, and in the script, Eleven's eyes dart back and forth in the Nina tank, but in the final version, her nose bleeds from both nostrils, and we don't see her eyes move. I'm guessing this was easier to film when they did it, and they wanted more consistency with the nose bleeding aspect. The camera shots are different in this sequence, but the action at the silo is pretty much the same. And something I've picked up on as we've been comparing, especially this last chunk of the script, is there's some key differences between the eyes and the nose bleeding. And I think this is maybe something that wasn't caught when they were scripting it, because, we know they were working in isolation during COVID, didn't have traditional writer's room, but they went to film it. And I think they realized, okay, this has to be consistent. We have shown for 3 seasons, this is what happens when someone uses their powers. And if we're going to try to draw a through line here for the big reveal, this has to be consistent. I also wonder if the eye thing is harder to do physically than they were anticipating, because you basically have to have your eyes closed and move your eyes back and forth underneath your eyelids, which, while it's a cool effect, I generally think it's probably harder to physically do than they were anticipating, especially when you're in a large vat of water. Like, it was one thing to have the one actor do it while looking at the clock. It's another thing to repeatedly ask young actors to do it in various scenarios. So I also wonder if maybe it was a physical thing where they realized this was a lot harder to do consistently, then, it looked great. And when they scripted it, they were like, oh, this is a bit harder to do visually, or it's not really necessary. And I also wonder if maybe they were trying to make a connection where it's like, okay, when Henry's doing this thing to the clock, or when he's starting the attack, we see this. And then we transition to the nose bleeding, whereas 11 is, in the memory, she's regaining something, but she's not doing those same actions. She is remembering, but she's not regaining. She's not doing those same actions. But her nose bleeding does make sense as that comes back to her powers come back, which is something we see mirrored when Henry gets his powers back in the memory. So I think this is more, it sounded good when they scripted it, but then I went to film and went, okay, this has to be consistent all the way through. This has to be something the actors can physically do consistently, and it has to line up with what we established in the first 3 seasons.
Yeah. I think it's also because in the episodes prior to this one, we've already seen her do the eye thing when she gets into the Nina tank, because, you know, it means she's like searching. And so I think like maybe they realized when they filmed that it wasn't really necessary for that to happen because that's already been happening. And also to let the audience know that she's got her powers back now, because that's how we've known, like you said, for the past 3 seasons, that's when she uses her powers, she gets nosebleeds. So I think that's why they changed it. I'm glad they changed it because it would have not looked that great. But just a quick question for you. Like, how do you think that she actually got her powers back?
That's a good question. I feel like what I settled on having rewatched is that it's both physical and psychological. That there's like both elements to it. That Brenner keeps saying she has to leave the train station. So there was definitely some kind of mental block going on there. But I also think it was physical because, as we see in season 3, she gets in afterwards. She realizes she can't use her powers, and something's been drained, something's been taken from her. And I've seen other people compare it to something like a stroke, where for some things that happen, accidents, illnesses, there is both a physical and a mental component where something has physically been changed, but there also becomes a mental blockage. And how sometimes you can fix the physical thing, but you got to get through the mental blockage, or sometimes the other way. You know, you got to get through the mental blockage to fix the physical. And so, to me, having rewatched more than once, where the impression I'm left with is something was physically taken from her, and then you know, what they were trying to do is, okay, something's physically been taken, but if we can get the brain to believe and to understand and to get past the mental blockage, we can rebuild this physical ability that is still latent within her. And that they were trying to trigger memories, they were trying to do this stuff to trigger, to bring it back in order to, you know, get past that mental blockage so she can rebuild her strength. And why in particular he thought these ones, I don't know. Because we already saw that with the bullying at school that those memories were starting to come back. So it stands to reason that had that continued, or had they let Joyce know that that's what the situation was, you know, they could have gotten her to recall this stuff in a kiddie pool in the backyard, and this would not have been necessary. So I wonder if it was twofold. He's trying to get her past the mental block and remember this moment of strength, and that she did that and pushed through the mental block to rebuild her powers. But I also wonder if he wanted her to remember this incident happening so she would understand what they were up against. Because, you know, up to that point in season 3, Henry certainly thinks that she remembers, and then he realizes after the whole Billy situation that she clearly doesn't. And so I wonder if Brenner went through a similar thing where he realized at a certain point she didn't remember this. He thought that would come back, and it never did. And so I don't know how he came to that conclusion, but at some point realized we need to re-trigger this, or he thought he didn't need to re-trigger it, so that, you know, we can get past this mental blockage and she can remember this time of strength, you know, break through, and this is going to come back to her. We're going to be able to retrain her brain. She's going to regain this ability. However, we want to talk about unreliable narrator. Brenner is never a reliable narrator. So we don't know how much of what he says is true. And I have to believe that traumatizing her again was not the only way to do this. And if they needed to get her past a certain blockage point, you know, we saw Tristan Hopper do this with her previously. And I have no doubt that give them a kiddie pool in the backyard, and I'm sure they could have pulled it off. You know, I don't think torturing her was definitely not necessary. So I think there was part of it where Berta just wanted to do that because he just wanted to see what would happen. He's a scientist. He wanted to see what would happen. But yeah, it is a tricky thing because it's phrased originally, or presented rather, that it's a physical thing she has lost. But then later on, it seems to be more of a mental thing. So I come down on it being both. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I always thought, like, since season 3 that it was a drained battery thing, because they kept hammering that point home throughout season 3, and that she was just mentally exhausted, and maybe like kind of what Mike was saying about, you know, she could get like an aneurysm or something. I know that's not what he said exactly, but I mean, in a way, that's kind of what happened. And yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think it's equal parts mental and physical, because I mean, like we saw in episode 1 of season 4, like with her and Angela outside the school, I mean, you could tell like she maybe felt something there, and then she just like couldn't finish through, and she was obviously going through a very difficult time, just in normal circumstances, the bullying and everything. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think it's ever going to truly be explained, because again, like, this is not real, and like, how can you really explain that? Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think that the concept of not just the Nina project itself, but the opera, the Brenner gets that idea from about the train station. I think that was an interesting concept and idea, but I mean, I still don't understand really what that all means as it relates to 11 and her past. Psychologists will tell you that like suppressed memories aren't really a thing, at least not like what she's experienced. But I mean, I have certainly tried to suppress some memories from way back in my past. But I think at the end of the day, it's because of like the way they decided to write the narrative of kind of having this reverse effect. Because in season 1, I mean, obviously they didn't know any of this, that they wanted to do any of this in this course of the show. And so because we had Brenner in season 1, well, we can't go back in time with Brenner and kill him, so we have to kind of make it work. And I think they made it work the best of their abilities. But
yeah, there definitely is an element of, okay, we've had this idea, we got to tie this all together, and it's not super perfect, because I think if coming from season 1, they'd had an idea for a full series, I think there's a lot of stuff that would have worked a lot better. But because the show was originally intended to be an anthology, and season 1 was supposed to be a self-contained unit, and after that, they thought the show was dead, it was getting buried, everybody moved on with their lives, and were shocked when it became a sleeper hit. They were asked to come back for season 2. From that point, I think you can see what they were building. But because they didn't have any of that in mind in season 1, there definitely are things where it's like, okay, had they been able to build that from the beginning, some of the stuff would make a lot more sense, but you just can't go back in time. And so I definitely think there are parts of season 4 that fall into that. When it reminds me of Birthday Cake as well. When we're recording this, there's, been posts about, Will's birthday, and the jury is still out on that one. So I definitely think there are parts of season 4 where it's cool and all, but it doesn't quite line up, because they just didn't have that plan yet in season 1, or they were thinking about season 4 as a self-contained unit and didn't take the time to go back and check some details from previous seasons. And I think that goes back to not having a traditional writer's room, being isolated, but also the cast not having the opportunity to go through this, because as you and I have talked about, Winona Ryder is one of those people that catches things, who is one of the consultants, and because they didn't have the ability to do that as normal, there's just stuff that wasn't caught or doesn't make as much sense as it should, and then they were so rushed to film and release this season, like down to the wire. I think they just ran out of time where they're like, well, this doesn't make the most sense, but this is what we got. We got to go with it, guys. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle all of that in season 5, because that's a big task to somehow make everything make sense and wrap it all up and bring it all together in this cohesive way when you have, one season where, it was intended to be an anthology, so some stuff doesn't line up. You have another season done during COVID. So there's some inconsistencies there, and that's a lot to wrap up and bring together. So I will be very interested to see how they pull that off. Okay, so coming back to the Rainbow Room, in the script, we push past 1 to see 11 in the mirror as her younger self, because in this version, the mirror is not shattered. It is still intact. But in the final version, we back away from 1 to where 11, as her younger self, is in her power pose. Again, I'm guessing this probably worked better because the mirror in this version is not cracked. So I think once they made a decision as we're going to put him through the mirror, it's not going to be intact. I think they had to change a bunch of the shots they had planned because some stuff just no longer worked visually or was no longer possible. And honestly, I like this version a lot better. While it would have been cool to see the original, I think this version works a lot better.
Yeah, and I think, too, what they were maybe going for there was to foreshadow what he's going to do later on in the season, with the rifts and stuff. But, yeah, I mean, even, just reading it here in the script, I can't even visualize what that would even look like. Think that there are some, storyboard art from season 4 from the artist Michael Mayer for Stranger Things. Maybe, we could go and look up on his website or something to see if we could see if he's got anything on there that would show us what this would have looked like had it made the final cut. But yeah, I mean, I can't even really visualize what that would even look like.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that are described here where it's hard to even picture them because the final version wound up being so different. So, yeah, it would be interesting to see what that would have ultimately looked like. And the next change that there is that in the final version, the room goes dark as she moves toward one who has now been thrown through the mirror, which does not happen in the script. In the script, it says that the lights stop flickering, everything calms. So it's just the room becomes calm, but the lights are still on. They've gone from going crazy and flickering to just being on. Whereas in the final version, they chose to have the room go dark and we get these really cool close-up shots. And I personally really prefer this version, even though it is a bit harder to see what's going on a little bit, because I feel like what they're really trying to do is foreshadow and, really make the rift that's been created pop on screen, which I don't think it would have done the same way if they'd had the room be full of light. And if you look at the other rifts we see throughout season 4, they are also near darkness. There's this contrast that makes them really pop on screen. And if you're going to buy that many pool noodles and you are going to put this much effort into creating these rifts, which again, these are practical effects. They have to physically cut the pool noodles and do all the stuff and make them and then animate it. If you're going to put that much work and you want that to pop on screen, you want that to look as cool as humanly possible. And so I appreciate that there's a lot of subtle changes they made this season that really made those effects pop because they're so cool. They spent so much time on them and the crew spent so much time to make this look as realistic and as interesting as possible. And so I think the reason they have everything go dark is A, to make that pop visually, and B, I think to really, emphasize the contrast and also to foreshadow what's to come, that this is a dark time. We're talking about a dark thing. This is the villain they are setting up. This is the struggle between good and evil. And it really just brings it home. And practically, I think, what we're meant to take away is that they've just had this massive battle. They've shattered the mirror and, it's just this massive power surge. We know that there are power surges to do with the Upside Down. We see the lights flicker. We see massive power surges. So I think that's also part of it. This has been a power surge, this mass energy, this telekinetic energy has caused such a power surge, but in this battle that it's killed the lights. And so the only light emanating is from this rift that's been created. And then next we have, in the script, his body explodes into black ash, but in the final version, you can see the rift and the vines behind Henry /Vecna/1 as his body begins to disintegrate. In the script, the rift begins to close slowly, but in the final version, we linger on it and see that one is gone, but the red glow is there, that the vines have sprouted out of it.
This sequence here of when his body is literally disintegrating as she pushes him into the rift has me questioning, did she actually kill him? Is he telling the truth about that? Is he really dead or is he really alive? Because we saw it on screen and it happens just like it did in season 1 with the Demogorgon. And it reminds me a lot of Voldemort in the Deathly Hallows, which we know is an influence on Stranger Things. I mean, when Harry killed Voldemort, he also disintegrated. So I wonder, like, did she really actually kill him?
Yeah, I don't think she did. I think when he's saying that, he's talking more metaphorically, like killing a part of him, because we can see that he does not, in fact, die. He is horribly disfigured by the lightning, but also he's not as disfigured as we eventually see him when we flash forward to the 80s. So clearly he's participated in the body modification to a certain extent here. He's had some work done because, he's got all the vines attached to him and it's become so much more. And while there's definitely parts of his body you can see are similar to where the lightning struck him, he's still got part of his clothes on. He's still, parts of him are still recognizable as Henry Creel. When we see those memories of him wandering through the Upside Down as he sees it, which looks more like this rocky planet type area, we see the creation of the Mind Flayer. So it's definitely possible that he could have patched himself up somehow and still remained human looking. So over time, he has clearly participated in the modifications to the point that we see him as this sort of vine-covered creature in the 80s. So yeah, I don't think she actually kills him, which also raises questions. Did she kill the Demogorgon in season 1? Because, the guy gets sent through this crevice, struck by lightning, winds up the Upside Down. As you said, it's very similar to the Demogorgon in season 1. So did that Demogorgon actually die? Or did it just tumble through and it was injured, but it carried on? Because the impression we're left with is it's just kind of disintegrated into black ash, but we don't actually see that final part because it cuts back and forth between the boys and 11. And the original impression we're supposed to get is 11 has died, and, the Demogorgon has been defeated, and it's disintegrated, and it's died. But because we know both 11 was sent actually into the Upside Down, she did not die. And since there are similarities here in terms of the attack, and the script points out that we are supposed to be comparing this and seeing the similarities to 11. It says in the script, 11 is alone now, breathing hard. The ash dissipates to reveal that one is gone. A glowing rift scars the mirror, where one was just pinned, just like when Elle killed the Demogorgon. So the script says the Demogorgon is killed, but as we know, there have been changes from the script to screen. I think it's kind of up for interpretation here. It's possible that Demogorgon did die. It's also possible a similar thing happened to Henry that happened to that Demogorgon. Something was lost there, but not complete death. So I think we're supposed to be left with it's supposed to be a bit more ambiguous in the final version.
Yeah, I think so too. And I honestly think that is something that we still have yet to learn in the show. I think we're going to get some answers to that in season 5, because that's such a huge part of the lore of the show, is the Upside Down, and with 11 and Vecna and their powers. And so I do think we'll get maybe some answers to that in season 5, of like how she is able to open gates to the alternate dimension, which we know from Vecna himself that he's not able to do, but she is. And so I think it's something that they've kind of told us, hey, put a pin in this because we're coming back to this. I would personally hate it if they didn't at least touch on it in season 5, because I feel like if they don't, it was like, well, what was the point of you showing us the original gate when she did all this?
Yeah, for sure. And I do hope they come back to it. And that's a good point you make about how, we can see Elle open and close gates with her powers, but Henry does not appear to have that ability. Although I do wonder, it seems to be indicated that, well, he needs to kill people in order to open these gates, but does he? Because Henry strikes me as the kind of person who would not be able to do something or struggle with it. And the fact that his answer was, I gotta kill people to do this, rather than finding another way, or, we just see Elle has this ability. So to me, it's also possible he could just do this the same way Elle does. And he's either just decided not to, or has convinced himself he has to kill people. Or perhaps when he's killed others, he noticed something Like he noticed something with those kills and, because we don't know how he realized that killing people would open gates. So he must have realized that some prior to this. So maybe it was something to do with Billy or Will or Bart, but we don't know. But there's got to have been something that turned him on to this because he's been stuck in the Upside Down for, decades. So there's got to be something that turned him on to that, somehow gave him this impression or this idea. Because, Elle was born, as were the other children, from the program that was started with him. All this derives from his original powers. So presumably they should have the same abilities or the ability to develop that. So question, can he not do this? Or has he just chosen to do it this way or convinced himself that he must do it this way? Because something I think we see throughout is people around 11 insisting she must do things a certain way. You have to do it this way. This is the only way. And then her discovering as she grows and makes friends and forms connections that actually know that's not true. You've just decided this is the way we're doing it, but that doesn't actually make it true. And that she can do other things or do things other ways when she tries. So I'm curious to see the explanation there. Is this something Henry cannot do? Or is this something he can do, but it's decided or chosen that he must do it this other way?
Yeah, and the funny thing is that both times that 11 opened the gate, she wasn't trying to open the gate. It's just that, Brenner pushed her too far the second time around, and the first time around, she was terrified of this maniac ranting about his family for 10 minutes, and after he just slaughtered a bunch of people, including children in the lab. So I think that's what's so crazy about it is she wasn't even trying.
Yeah, and I do think that indicates something about their powers and the way they work and maybe why he chose her, because we hear Brenner say that she's more powerful than the others, or I think, rather, Henry says that, but, Brenner's clearly focusing on her. And the implication here is that she is more powerful than the others, that if he's realized she can just do things accidentally, again, she wasn't even trying, she was just freaked out and things just kind of happened. It was like this burst of telekinetic energy, whereas Henry has clearly tried or has been attempting to do this and he's, for some reason, either not able to. So the fact that she could accidentally do this without meaning to, meanwhile, Henry is actively trying and he can't without killing people, apparently. Her powers come from a program that started with him. I think is very interesting because either that implies that she has this level of power that supersedes even what he could do, perhaps because her mother was part of the program. That kind of increased, she got stuff in womb and then those powers were developed further. Perhaps that's part of it. Or it could also be that there's another way to do this or just Henry's not harnessing it properly. We don't know, but yeah, you bring up a good point that Elle does things accidentally that Vecna apparently can't do without killing people, or so he thinks. Alrighty, so after, Elle, slams him into the wall and we see the ash and the vines. In the final version, as one falls through the rift, lightning scorches his body, and then we cut to present day Vecna. But in the script, it says lightning strikes his body and then vines begin to crawl up his scorched body and second by second, shot by shot, he transforms into something that is no longer human, into a monster. So the implication of the scripted version is that we see him fall through, the lightning strikes him, and that this lightning strike is combined with these vines crawling up is what transforms him into Vecna. It is not a voluntary process. He is struck by lightning repeatedly, presumably falls into the Upside Down, is attacked by the vines, and that creates Vecna, and we're supposed to see that he is Vecna at this point, and then it transitions into the final reveal shot. Whereas in the final version, we see his body is struck by lightning, parts of his body begin to resemble the scorched skin that we see later, but, it's not quite that extreme. And because of that, he's still, from some of the memories we see later on, he is still, we see him wandering around the Upside Down. We see he still looks human to a certain extent. He's not attacked by vines immediately. That does not happen. And so when they cut to the present day Vecna and we see him attached to the spider web, we see the vines and all that, the implication of the final version is that he was more of a participant in this process. So the original one was this thing happens to him, he's struck by lightning, the vines attack him, and he becomes this thing. He had no choice. He just becomes this monster, and it progresses from there. But this, plus the other memories we see, show us that, he was severely injured, his skin was burnt, and it was obviously very painful, but he was not immediately attacked by vines, and he was still human looking at this point. There was still a chance that he could have, patched himself up or, gone a different path. And that, the vines, the connection to the spider web of vines, the fact that his appearance is where he's, half vine, half scorched skin. Also the loss of, we see his nose has been damaged, a bunch of his face has been damaged. That doesn't come until later. He still looks humanoid at this stage, a bit damaged. His skin's damaged. So I thought that was interesting that, the original version is just, he became a monster right then and there, had no other path, whereas the final version shows us that, no, that he was severely injured, but he was not yet the monster we see in season 4. That was something that he participated in and created over time, that he made himself into this monster physically. And, he related here and say to 11 that, that he became the monster he was always intended to become, that, Brenner didn't make him, this is always who he was meant to be, which I think is interesting because, in the script version, he sees just a monster right off the bat, but in the final version, this is something he participated and built and created over time. Brenner took him in and made him part of this program, and then he made the decision to kill all these kids and all the staff, and then 11 surprised him by being stronger than he expected and sending him into this other dimension. But there was a turning point at some point between what we see there in the 70s to the 80s where he chose to experiment with this stuff. He chose to get more into the vines. He chose to, do something that massively damaged his face and other parts of his body to the point that he is covered with vines, but apart from that does not appear to have clothing on, to the point that this is now his coverage. I mean, he still has clothes in the original version when he first winds up there. So it makes him more of a participant in this physical monster transformation process, which I thought was a really interesting change.
Yeah, so do I. And I think because we see him in episode 9, when he's given us, the flashback of when he first entered into the Upside Down, he still has his clothes on, he still looks very much human. And so I wonder if they maybe changed this in post, because it's something that they wanted to save for in season 5, which I personally am here for. I would love just for my own entertainment, just to see him actually literally become Vecna physically. I think it's safe to say that he's always been Vecna mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but to see him to become Vecna physically. And I also wonder too, if him being connected to the hive mind and everything that happened in season 2 and season 3 with the burnings in season 2, and then in season 3 being connected to the meat monster that was, the kids threw fireworks at. I wonder if that had anything to play a part in furthering this monstrous appearance.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it would be great to know how much of what the characters did in the real world, the right side of, affected his appearance, or how that developed. Everything we know, they're throwing the fireworks, everything that happened at the mall, but then we see, with the flamethrower, of all the stuff they've done over the seasons, how much has that, or when the Demogorgon, they set the Demogorgon on fire at the buyer's house, how much of that affects him through the hive mind? Is that physically altering his appearance? How much of an impact is that having? How direct is this? And why did he choose this? Because he still had clothes. He's still somewhat human. Because in the scripted version, the vines just kind of crawl up him, and it's he's just kind of attacked by them. But we don't see that. And we later see him wandering around in there. That implies that he chose to become a part of the vines and part of the hive mind and experimented with this. And I mean, it seems to indicate he mutilated himself in some way, because you don't get, like, he was not in that state when he first wound up there. And he didn't have to be in that state. I mean, we see this dimension has, life, wildlife, so to speak. So he could have fashioned himself some other clothes, there's other things he could have done to kind of remain human and maintain that appearance in some way, or try to kind of patch up or deal with what has happened. And the fact that he chose to do this is interesting, because it also seems to indicate that something he experimented with or something he did caused his nose to fall off. Like, something went wrong at some point. And when they show the final shot, you can see parts of the seared flesh on his chest, but you can also see parts of the vines have taken over and his arms and everything. You can see just how bad this damage is. And the original version, that just kind of happened to him. But in this final version, that happened over a number of years. He participated in it, and clearly some stuff just failed. Some stuff did not go well, or how he was expecting it to, because you can see parts of his body have been mutilated that don't appear to me anyway to be intentional. I don't think he intentionally was going for a nose job there. So I too would love to see that transformation, that physical transformation, and what he experimented with and how that came about and how long did it take him. And was he in this state as far back as season 1? How did that develop? And how did he figure out the vines were a hive mind? Or did he create that somehow? How are the vines, the mind flare connected to the demogorgons? Did he create that? Was it already there? Because from what we see, the demogorgons and the other creatures are just kind of wandering around doing their own thing. They don't appear to be connected to a hive mind, and we see him create the mind flare. So how can he control the particles and the dust? I too am very curious as to, how all of that works. And I feel like they've done enough setup here that they got to be coming back to that. And the other thing that just occurred to me while we were talking about this is, so the big thing of this episode is the reveal, right? It's the reveal of the tattoo. That's the big reveal here. It occurred to me that in the original version, where it says that, second by second, shot by shot, he transforms into something that is no longer human, into a monster, into Vecna. The final reveal actually isn't necessary, and it's not as impactful nor as cool, because the way it's written in the script is the scene is described, and then, the tattoo, 1, Henry is Vecna, Vecna is 1, and right there with the final boom of thunder, and then the episode ends, and the tattoo, 1, Henry is Vecna, Vecna is 1, is all underlined, we are really drawing your attention to this. If they'd gone with the original version, that's not necessary. It's not very impactful, in my opinion, because if you've just shown him becoming Vecna in real time, it's okay, well, now he's Vecna. But because they don't show, we just see him tumble through this crevice when they cut to the attic, and you're already knowing this guy's a bad guy, but they show the tattoo and it's revealed. That is the big reveal. It packs a big punch. Aesthetically, it's really cool. And it's, it closes out the episode. It brings that punch. It's the big reveal, is what we've been building towards. And that just doesn't have the same impact. And it's not like a twist. It's not really a reveal if they've just shown him physically becoming Vecna.
Yeah, and agree. And it also piggybacks and kind of parallels off of, an earlier reveal in this episode of when 11 learns that the orderly is actually not only a number, but he's number 1. And so I think it just literally just the way they did it in the final cut just literally brings it all full circle. And yeah, I think showing us and not telling us, I think was the best thing they could have done here, because it's yeah, we get it. By now we definitely get that Henry is Vecna is 1.
100%. And I'm sure there's stuff they did film, and maybe we'll see this footage in season 5 where they filmed different transitions or different things in post that they did. And then they kind of went back over it and you know what, this is more impactful. We don't show this yet. Or we know there's some stuff they scripted that we didn't see, like in the original, when the forms get to the upside down, we're supposed to see this massive wide shot, and it's described as, the most we've ever seen of the upside down, and it's this epic shot. And we didn't actually get that. It's more of a close-up on them running. So it gives me the impression that there was stuff they either scripted and didn't shoot, or they did film it and went, you know what, this reveal works better, the tension builds better if we don't show this yet. And once we've established this, we've done the big reveals, then we can show it. Then we can give people this information. And I think that was a good decision because it's built to this place where now you can show us in season 5 and it's going to pack a punch. Because we've got the background, you did the big reveal, and now it's just, here's like, they're showing the expansion. They're showing, this is how we've given you the information you need to have. Let us show you the transformation. Let us show you how it became this. And, I'm excited to see the Vecna transformation, but I'm also excited to see the transformation of the Upside Down. How do we get from, what we see in those memories of Henry stumbling around and creating the Mind Flayer to what we see in season 1 to all the way to season 4? That is a huge transformation of this world, this dimension that's inhabited by these, free roaming creatures who are just minding their business to what we see in season, 1 and 4. It's very different. So I'm also really excited to see that.
Yeah, so am I.
And the next thing I want to talk about is how we transition from him falling through the crevice into the Creel house, because this is also quite different from script to screen. So in the original version, we go from second by second, shot by shot, he transforms into something that is no longer human, into a monster, and it says interior Creel house, attic, upside down. We have Vecna that is underlined, italicized, and it says, we've now come full circle. We're back in the attic where Vecna continues to hang from his web, digging and worming his way into Nancy's mind with his ranged attack. Our camera slowly drops below his wrist, vine slither, briefly parting to reveal the bare, rotted skin beneath. Then, in a bright flash of red lightning, we finally see it. The tattoo. 1. Henry is Vecna. Vecna is 1. And right here with a final boom of thunder, and that's the end of the episode. Now, we don't actually see a bunch of this stuff in the final version. So, in the script, his arm is illuminated by red lightning, but in the final version, the Upside Down is bathed in blue light. It's a much darker color scheme here. And there's also significant differences with what's going on with Nancy, because in the final version, we cut to the attic, we see Vecna hanging out in his web, we get this full body shot, and then it pans over to his wrist and the vine slither back. And while it is kind of bare skin, it's also kind of rotted. There's a bit more to it, it's a bit more callous than it's quite described in the script. And the other big difference here is in the scripted version, it says he's hanging from his web and digging and worming his way into Nancy's mind with his ranged attack, which implies we're supposed to be seeing something of that in this scene, or there's something he's supposed to be doing that's supposed to indicate that. But in the final version, we don't see that at all. He's just chilling on this web. Now, the implication is that as these two timelines meet, that he is showing Nancy the memories that she's running through while this is going on. But, if we didn't have that context, if you just watch this one part of the scene, he is just, he's hanging on his web. We don't get any indication as to what he's doing in his mind. He's just hanging on his web. So I thought that was really interesting. And to be honest, I like this reveal a lot better than we do see on screen, because it's so much more impactful. It's like scarier, but in a psychological way. And they don't go for a jump scare or anything, but it's so much more visually impactful. And it builds everything to this point. And whether as an audience member, you figured this out already, or you were like, well, this guy's a bad guy, but I'm not sure what the connection is. They do the transitions between the memories and in the Creel house and the Rainbow Room so seamlessly that you actually forget these are two different timelines. It's how seamless it is. And actually, we talked about this in a previous episode where when he says the thing about being left out and misunderstood, and I was like, Nancy's Miss Popular. What the heck is he talking about? And you're like, oh, right, two different timelines. But that's how seamless it is. And so I thought that was super interesting that they chose to do it this way. And also the color palette. Like, by this point, they'd established the bluish sort of color palette for the Upside Down, or parts of it when they're showing Vecna, and the red for other things. They seem to be differentiating between, the physical Upside Down and the mindscape. So I feel like by this point, they decided what color scheme they were using for what, and that's why we see blue and not red here.
Yeah, and I think the final on-screen version, again, it just packs more of a punch, because what I consider to be extra fluff here as it is in the script. Like, we don't need that at this point. Like, let's just end it on a big, powerful scene that gives out implications that will make people have questions for a month until volume 2 comes out, and let's just go with that. So I think it's the conciseness, I think, is what makes it's so good in the final version. But I wonder if Vecna, part of what he was showing Nancy, just made me think of this when you were talking about Nancy, but I wonder if he showed her what happened between him and 11 in those flashbacks.
Oh, that's a good point. I mean, he might have, because he realizes after season 3 that she doesn't remember, and he has no idea she's been in Nevada regaining those memories, and he can't reach her, clearly, at this point, until she voluntarily goes in there to save Max. So, yeah, you could be right. He could be also showing her the memories we're seeing from 11's past at the end of that, because we know after the memories we see, he shows her, her loved ones dying and the extra monsters and the gates and everything. So also possibly he also showed her those memories of, from the Rainbow Room and the massacre, which means that Nancy's trance went on for a lot longer than we actually see on screen, which I think explains a lot of the panic that the other teens are experiencing. Because, I mean, she'd have to be there for quite some time for that to be possible. And he says, tell 11. So he's trying to give her all the information because he thinks 11 doesn't remember any of this, and he can't get to her or Will, and he can't access them, and he doesn't know where they are, or if he doesn't know where they are, he can't get to them. So, yeah, that's very possible.
And that's our show. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe and tell your friends. Our theme music is provided by Neon Knights. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. Please join us next time, same dial, same time.
Over and out.